The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to our UCEA webinar, Crafting Strong Conference Proposals. We're happy that those of you, who could make it are here with us. We're going to do a little bit of an extended introduction because we know that oftentimes people have a difficult time with technology or doing updates at the last minute that they didn't know they needed. So we give some folks some time. We have a lot of people registered, although we know a lot of times that's also because people are going to watch it later. My name is Holly Mackey. I'm the Associate Co-Director for the UCEA Barbara L. Jackson Scholars Network, and Lisa Bass is the other co-director. I'm sure many of you have met her. And with us, we also have Danny, our graduate student, who makes all of the magic happen behind the scenes. Angel, who is our former graduate assistant and is now at Claremont College, will be joining us a little bit later. She's in a meeting right now. And we have as our very special guest, a former Jackson Scholar and junior faculty member, James Wright at San Diego State University. And he has agreed to participate with this and help talk through really how to craft conference proposals, because it seems very simple, but in fact it is oftentimes very difficult. But it's the best way to get yourself in front of people, network with people, meet people, and really help show others what it is that you're doing with your research, with your teaching, with your service. So we thought this would be a great time to do it. We know we have a lot of conference proposal deadlines coming up. And between James and I, what we really hope to walk you through today is thinking through what is a call for proposals, what should be in it, how do you think about your research agenda, how do you translate your research over, what should be in your proposal. And then we do have a section that we're going to talk about really conferences in and of themselves and how people who are doing reviewing and organizing sessions think about building their conference programs. And then really kind of the technical aspects of it, the nuts and bolts, getting it submitted, and then etiquette that goes along really after you've submitted, because there are things along the line that organizers have come across that they've spoken about that I think is helpful for you to know. We have time at the end for questions and answers, so we want to make sure we have plenty of that. You can put all of your questions along the way in the dialog box on the side. You can type it in there. We have Danny's moderating on the side, and he'll make sure that all of your questions get noted and answered. And sometimes he'll take several that are similar and he'll make them into one question. So if you don't feel that your question has been answered, it might have either been wrapped into one question with several others, or you can feel free to retype it and he'll get to that. If it's a question that we can't answer, there's resources attached to it. We'll come back to it. Oftentimes too, you can feel free to post resources in the side too as links, because other people can see those things there. So with that, I'm going to let Dr. Wright tell you a little bit about himself and his research before we get started.
Okay, so good morning. So I'm here on the West Coast, so it's still morning here. And good afternoon, and good afternoon to everyone who's elsewhere. So as Dr. Mackey mentioned, my name is James Wright. I am first-year faculty here, assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership at San Diego State University. And my research is in and around urban education and the importance of culturally responsive school leadership. So that pretty much is my research agenda in a nutshell. I look at a lot of different aspects around educational leadership. So there's some policy aspects in which I look at the ways in which policy is or is not culturally responsive, and what some of the implications for that might be for minoritized populations, students in urban spaces, students of color. So and then we can talk a little bit more about that if anyone is interested, but pretty much that's the gist of my research.
Thank you. Okay, Danny, if you want to go ahead and pop us into the first slide. So as Dr. Wright and I were thinking through what it is that you might want to know, we realized there's going to be a wide range of experience with conference proposals within people who are going to be watching the seminar and people who might want to download it later, the webinar, sorry. And so just right off the bat, at the beginning, thinking through like, what is a call for proposal? And you'll get emails from different people who, like, you know, like Secretary for Division A for UCEA or AERA, or you'll get the UCEA bulletin coming through, or the CSLE newsletter, or all of these different things in journals, and you'll see the RFPs and the CFPs, and you may or may not know what they're asking. And the call for proposals is really just that. It's saying there's a conference coming up, we're open and accepting proposals through a certain amount of time, and it'll give you all of the information that you need to know. So it's really, really important that you read through them and know exactly what it is that the conference is about, and what they want for the proposals. And we'll get a little bit more into that later. But in general, just understanding that when it's a call for proposals, we get questions a lot with the different conferences about, you know, if I submit, does that mean because they've asked me to submit, I'll automatically get in? Of course, the answer is no. It's a competitive, it's a blind peer review typically for most conferences, depending upon the size and the scope of the conference. But it's really an invitation for people to have the opportunity to present their work. And as you're looking at the call for proposals, you need to think about what your career goals are. So doctoral students oftentimes are going to become professors, or they might want to be practitioner scholars and stay within schools, or do any number of things, work in think tanks. And thinking through what type of conference might be best suited for you is important when you're looking at call for proposals. So if you're going to go into the professoriate and you want to be a research faculty member, then you want to be thinking about conferences that will allow you to showcase your empirical work and the research that you're doing. Whereas if you are a principal and you want to become a superintendent or some type of district leader, and you want to do action research and you want to stay very connected into the field, you might want to think about looking at practitioner-based conferences where you can show that you're using research to inform practice in really meaningful ways. So career goals are always really the starting point there. And then thinking through also, you know, where are you on your program, and are you ready for some of the different types of conferences, and the call for proposal will really tell you what they're looking for. And thinking through really where conferences might be, right? Where do you find the information on these? Your department can help you with this. If you're a Jackson Scholar and you've been assigned a mentor, your mentor can help you with this, your faculty advisor. UCEA gives you a lot of information about that, but really the big conferences that come into Ed Leadership, of course, are University Council for Educational Administration in November and American Educational Research Association in Aprilish. It's gone into May a couple of times. And students often don't really pay attention to the fact that, you know, those are when the conferences occur, but then the proposals, the call for proposals will come out in the spring, and you have to submit by June, end of May, June, to go to UCEA in November, and you have to submit by midsummer to go to AER in April. So you need to be really thinking ahead as you're going to be developing your conference proposals. So when you get these calls, you need to open them, read them immediately, and know when the deadline is to propose, because you don't want to be in this mad rush at the very end to submit, and then submit work that demonstrates that you waited until the end to submit your proposal, because it does come across to reviewers oftentimes that you've done that. And it can be difficult, right? So the next point I put into this, you know, really kind of talking about CFPs, and it goes into the next slide that we're going to be talking about too in terms of your research. But when Dr. Wright and I were thinking through like what exactly should we talk about with this, he brought up a really good point about how it's a creative process. So people think of it as a really straightforward sort of process of, there's a call for proposals, I'm going to take my research, I'm going to propose it, and it's just going to go in. And it's not that cut and dried. Particularly, you know, the example that I had given was, you know, if you're in like teacher evaluation and your research is really looking at the ways administrators evaluate teachers, and the whole theme for the conference is looking at social justice and action-based leadership. How do you then translate that over if nothing you do really touches yet on social justice, and it's really a straightforward technical focus on teacher evaluation and leadership there? So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Wright because he had a really good way of thinking about this.
So when I think about the call for proposal and my approach to it, and like Dr. Mackey said, it is a creative process for me at least, and I think that has helped me. That approach or that thought process has helped me to kind of extract some of my research agenda or my ideas, or it might be a paper that I'm working on, or when I was working on my dissertation, it might be an aspect of my dissertation that I would find that align with the CFP. And so it's a matter of just tearing apart some of your ideas, some of your writings, or something that's really salient that aligns with the call for proposal. So and then thinking of it in that way, I mentioned to Dr. Mackey that it is a creative process in that way. It's just basically what it means is basically just trying to fit an aspect or an aspect of your research into what the conference is asking for, or just to try to better align with what the conference, the theme of the conference.
Right. And it's important, and we'll come back into this on our next slide, but this is a good opportunity for you to think about the mentor-mentee conversation. Really being able to go to your mentor and say, here's my research, or here's what I'm working on. How do you see this fitting in, or in what ways do you see this fitting in? Because there are ways that it probably fits that you haven't thought about. And there are ways that your mentor can help you articulate that a little bit more. And thinking broadly in terms of mentorship, your other students, right, graduate students, other faculty members you've met at conferences who might work in a similar area can also help you in those ways. But in terms of developing a strong mentoring relationship with your assigned mentor or with your faculty advisor, these are really like nuts and bolts types of questions that are concrete. You can go to them, and it's not really conceptual questions that require a lot of what ifs, right? So if you're trying to develop a relationship, it's easy to email a specific question, set up an appointment, and then have a 15-20 minute conversation, and then leave and start to develop that way. So oftentimes mentoring can be challenging, right? And being a mentee can be challenging, and you're not sure how to start the relationship in a way that sets up a rhythm on how you're going to work together. And this is one way you can do that.
Dr. Mackey, I just want to back up a little bit, because what I did was I looked at the call for proposal for the 2019 UCEA, and just looking at the convention theme. And so this would probably be a good time to talk about it, because I don't see where else I might be able to. But so the convention theme for 2019 is validating subaltern forms of leadership and learning within and outside of schools. So I think in general, UCEA and AERA, which are the two conferences that I tend to attend yearly, but others as well, but those two specifically. But I think those conferences do a really good job of using really broad language, encompassing language that will allow you to easily align your research to the themes that they present. Like, so for example, with this particular convention theme, so it's validating subaltern forms of leadership and learning. So then they go on to outline what that looks like and who these people are, who they determine are subaltern. So the way in which this theme is outlined is so broad that there is an aspect that I'm sure, if you're doing any sort of research, whether it's with LGBTQ, whether it's with people of color, whether it's with women, whether it's with folks in communities and different urban communities, whether it's the broader communities within urban communities, with parents, grandparents, broader community members. They've allowed this call to encompass all of those different people, students, custodians, right? So this is all in the language. This is all in the language of the proposal. So it goes back to the point about being creative, because whatever your research is, it seems to be enough in here to align with what it is they're asking for. And I think with my experience, I mean, I have far more rejections than I do acceptance. So, but with my experience, I mean, but I think that's probably normal for graduate students. But I think that because it's so broad, I think that, you know, it's a matter of being able to tie in, and then once you find where it is your research aligns with whatever aspect aligns with the theme, it's a matter of tying it up really tight and then making a case. I think once I got to the point where I was able to identify that and do just that, I started to have success in terms of getting my my proposals accepted.
Yeah, that is good. And Danny, I'm gonna email you something real quick here. That's the one thing I forgot to put on these slides. I'm glad that Dr. Wright mentioned that. So we can put it up towards the end. Okay, so moving on then to articulating your research on the next slide. We just put together a few things here. This was really the hardest part, I thought, when I was a graduate student, and sometimes even now, in terms of figuring out how to craft a proposal and thinking through how it fits. So I'm going to go ahead, Dr. Wright, and let you take this one.
So the first one, realistically identifying where you are. So as Dr. Mackey mentioned earlier, you know, there's a lot of competition in these, you know, with these calls. And so I know, you know, sometimes it's difficult to really know where you are as a graduate student. Like I know for me, in my experiences, I thought that I was doing really good work at a certain point in my graduate studies. I thought that I was, you know, I probably thought that I was somewhere where I wasn't. And it took for me to, you know, have conversations with mentors. It took for me to go to conferences and hear other people talking about, other scholars and researchers talking about the things that, you know, that I was studying, for me to realize that I had a long way to go. So so it takes a lot of humility and understanding, you know where you are. And I know for myself, having, you know, worked abroad, having worked in schools for a significant amount of time, having been older when I started my program, my PhD program, you know, I kind of felt like I was somewhere where I really wasn't. And so there's a lot of humility that comes with this. And I think as it relates to a point that Dr. Mackey mentioned earlier about, you know, how competitive it is, you know, these conferences. So you could realistically have what you think is maybe the best work that you've created, right? And it might be a seminal piece at some point, and then you send it in as a proposal, and then it doesn't get accepted. And so so then, you know, it a lot of different emotions, a lot of different reactions can come from that. And I think that the thing that we don't consider as graduate students, and now that I'm on the other side, I know that people like Dr. Mackey who look at proposals, they understand. They understand that, okay, yeah, your proposal was really good, but you had this senior scholar who was, who's been writing about this for 20 or 30 years, and then and who did a really good job of aligning his or her her research with the theme, and it really resonates and all of this, and it was a choice between you as a graduate student and this particular person who's, much more senior, much more polished, and I think these are things that it's good to be mindful of this, because, and it's not, I'm not saying it to dissuade anyone, but I think having just crossed the threshold of graduating not long ago, 2017, I think that it's important to kind of understand where we fit in the grand scheme of things, and to be kind of humble about that. So that's what I'll say about the first point. And in terms of translating your work to the call for proposal, it goes back to, I don't want to belabor that point, but I really think that it is about just kind of understanding how broad the language is in CFPs typically. And by the language being so broad, it gives you the opportunity to really find a way to deconstruct your research, your agenda, something really specific within your research and within your agenda that aligns with the call for proposal, and really just try to tie it in really tight. And I think that that's what we're talking about with regards to translating the work into the, or translating or aligning the work to the call for proposals. And then I think the same point is aligned with, research agenda and fit. Again, these calls are really broad. Like, just to go back to the UCEA theme again, the folks who wrote this up, they talk about subaltern knowledge, and they do a good job of talking about, the origins of the term, which was, a post-Marxist with Gramsci, and then it was eventually appropriated by folks and, post-colonial theorists. And so then they use it differently than Gramsci used it. And post-colonial theorists used it differently than how it was initially used. And then people like Spivak took the term, and she used it a little bit differently. And then you have, which is not here, but you have like the Latin American scholars who use the term differently than all of them. So just that word, I mean, if you can find, because I think it's common. So the point is, I think it's common to find ways to, or you can find the ways in which concepts and ideas have evolved. And this is a good example of a broad theme, something that's really broad, a concept that's really broad. So I think the thing that might be helpful in thinking about it that way is that you can find a way to align what it is, what your research is, to all of this, even if it spins off, even if it's appropriating an idea that's well established. There's ways that you can do it justifiably. Some people will say to you, well, as a young scholar or as a graduate student, that's not your place. I won't go into that, but I've heard that before, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. But so I don't know if I would recommend trying to spin off of established knowledge and things like that. But I think the point is still the same, that they're broad enough for you to kind of fit your research into what it is the call is asking for. It's just a matter of being well read and kind of understanding how they're talking about whatever the concepts are. I mean, and with this one, UCEA in particular, it's about subaltern knowledge, and they do a really good job of trying to identify who might be identified as subaltern people. And in terms of mentorship and feedback, there's really, and from my own perspective and experiences, there's really no substitute for good mentorship. It's probably one of the most significant and impactful things that happened to me along my journey. Having folks that really took the time out to, read my work, to have conversations with me, to like push back on me and have me rethink things, and doing it in a loving way, a gentle way. When you find individuals like that on your journey, cling on to them, because they're valuable. And I know that the Jackson Scholar Network was one of the spaces that really allowed the mentorship network to really resonate with me, and it gave me much more than what I had in my own institution, which was great. I had great mentors and I had great experiences in my institution, but I think the Jackson Scholar Network broadened it up, it opened it up nationally, and so there's really no substitute for what that network will be able to do for you. And it's about being humble and reaching out to folks. And I think you'll find folks who will really be will really take the time to talk to you and talk you through things and try to build you up. And when you find those folks, like I said, latch on to them.
Well, and to echo that, even within your own programs, typically you can ask, who in the field would you recommend that I contact? Or would you send an email, doing a third-party introduction? Because I know it's such a small field that we're all really well connected. And I get a lot of emails from faculty across the country who say, I have an Indigenous student who wants to do this, and, would you be willing to talk to them? And I would. Going back a little bit, I think if you can frame something as a conceptual, like a thought piece, I don't really see a problem with younger scholars saying, I'm really thinking about this in a different way, and I think that I can do something pretty cool with this. I know a lot of scholars do say that you shouldn't do that. I'm not one of them. I think that creativity really helps us think through things differently. And
I wasn't one of them as a student either, but
yeah.
I didn't want to. I didn't want to go.
Depends, right? I also have students who come up to me and they think they have the best idea that no one's ever thought of it before, and then you go through like 60 years of the history of educational research and why it never worked with them, and they're just floored because they never bothered to pay attention to the fact that someone's done it because they didn't do the reading. Okay, so do your reading first and make sure you've done your reading first before you say that it's new and novel and different, because you'll be embarrassed. Although most people are polite enough not to embarrass you publicly. We'll take you to the side. But it is good to connect with other people. And, there's the Clark Scholars is a good opportunity to connect with people, or people who have been Clark Scholars who can say, like, here were my mentors. As you're looking forward, I know that there's so many ways to connect at these conferences with faculty. It almost sounds like, or it feels like there's more professional development sessions now than research sessions. And if you think really strategically through how to connect with people who are doing similar work to you, then you can have a broad mentoring network. And we're not here to push mentoring by any stretch of the imagination, but there are ways without even being in formal mentoring networks that you can have strong mentoring networks. And I've worked with a number of graduate students who I actually didn't know that they weren't both like Jackson, Clark, and graduate student summit students until they were already long into their career. And then I always thought that they were one of mine, and they weren't. So they just came along for the ride, and they're wonderful. And then some are very proactive, where they were very quiet, and I didn't even realize that they were one of mine. And then later on, it turns out that they were just really quiet and shy then, and now they're not. So that's a good way to think about it and get the feedback. You have to get the feedback and give people enough time to read your stuff. I know I had a really unique experience last year where a couple of graduate students decided they wanted to put a session together for UCEA, but they, like a month and a half out, they were sending the draft out to us and asking us for our feedback, and then making the adjustments and sending updates to us. And when students do that, they go to the top of my list of priorities on getting revisions out to them and doing what they need for them to be successful, even if that means that I'm putting like EAQ on hold and I'm putting my department chair on hold, and I'll put everybody on hold when I have graduate students who are thinking ahead and proactive and trying to do everything that they're told to do to be successful. And I think most faculty are probably like that.
Yeah, I would just want to piggyback off that point. You know, I've reached out to, you know, people whose work I admired and who I didn't know anything about them, except maybe I read their work or I saw them at a conference. And I would reach out, send them an email, and they would respond, and they were very gracious with their time, and they would, you know, they would sit and meet me for coffee. They would take phone calls from me. They would read my work, and it was really humbling, because I think sometimes, you know, I don't know, at least for me, sometimes you think, wow, this person is really, you know, someone who I really admire, and I really respect them and the work that they do. And they took the time out to sit and listen to me, who, you know, I didn't have anything, you know, in terms of how I feel, in terms of publications, in terms of name recognition or anything like that. But the point is, you know, you'd be surprised by reaching out to people. You'll be surprised how gracious some people are at returning your emails, maybe meeting you for coffee or telephone calls, or even reading your work. I mean, it's happened to me on several occasions with people that were that I would identify as really high profile. So yeah, that was outside of the Jackson Scholar Network. Just that I just ran across and sent emails off to, and then, you know, relationships were established that way.
Yeah, don't be afraid.
Right.
Okay.
Your money don't.
Go ahead on to our next one, because you have a lot of decisions you have to make. And this one comes up a lot because I probably get asked to be on, I couldn't even tell you how many times I get graduate students about this time of year are asking faculty to be on panels, on symposia, like talking sessions, just a lot of stuff. So if you're thinking about that, ask now, because the closer it gets to proposal time, the more we're going to get asked. But you have to decide, first of all, which conferences are going to fit what you need. And of course, UCEA is going to be, it should be your primary conference if you are in K-12 leadership. Right? That's just all there is to it. AERA, it's harder to get in at AERA, but it's the most prominent conference, and it's also very important if that fits your career goals. One thing I just realized, that with the PowerPoint up, Danny can't actually do it. I just asked him to do via email, so sorry, Danny. We have the Consortium for the Study of Leadership and Ethics in Education, the Ethics Conference. It used to be a separate conference. Now we've made it a pre-conference for UCEA, so it's on Wednesday night and Thursday. So we can have broader participation there. We have a lot of international people that come in. That's a really good opportunity for graduate students as well, to be able to go to CSLAE and UCEA, because they're in the same venue, back to back. And if you don't have your proposal accepted for UCEA, we still have our submissions open for CSLAE. So you have an opportunity to present at CSLAE and still be there for UCEA, although they're two separate conferences completely. So if you have something accepted at both, then you have two conferences on your vita. You have two separate submissions and presentations on your vita. So I would encourage you to look at that. And we'll have these links up available for you. We can send it out by email. And the Consortium for the Study of Leadership and Ethics is actually a UCEA center. So that's why we've combined them. But you also have to think about your travel, your budget, your timing, and some of this is going to go into etiquette later that I'll get to. But it gets really exciting to put in for conferences, and then when you get accepted, that's really exciting too. But what isn't exciting is when you have to start thinking about paying for all of it, and if your department can fund the travel. And even if you are part of a program that has partial payment or travel costs covered, not all of it is. And your time is priceless. You're there for a reason. You need to graduate. You have commitments to family. You have commitments to perhaps a second job that is not graduate school at the same time. And it's very difficult if you're constantly leaving for conference travel, and it can wear you down. You have your health to think about. It's, you know, graduate school is no joke, and you can get worn out fast, and you can run out of money fast. So you need to be realistic on what you're going to be doing. So if you think you're going to go to 3 conferences in the fall and 3 conferences in the spring, and things are back to back, and you're going to be getting off a plane and getting on a plane, what you're going to perhaps end up doing is calling conference organizers and canceling or not showing up. Or you might think, I'm going to get accepted, I'm not going to be able to present, but at least my name will be on the conference program and I can put it on my vita. And that's just really bad manners. And people remember those things. So thinking through what you can do. And then thinking through, again, if you're going to be doing empirical work or conceptual work, and how much time does it take to put the proposals together, planning ahead, knowing your limits, knowing what you can and can't do. So if you want to present a paper and it's a complete research-based empirical conference and you haven't done any research, don't try to act like you have, right? Or if it's something that is, you know, like a workshop-based and you don't have the expertise to do a workshop the way that you've said, you're probably going to have people attend who do have that expertise and they're trying to learn from you, and you don't want to promise more, right? So there's this concept of under promise and over deliver, and I think that holds true for workshops, panels, things like that with conference proposals. You don't want to try to claim that you have more expertise than you do. And logistics, yeah, I have overbooking here too. Logistics are also important. So if you have to be in, say, Toronto, right, and then you have to be in San Francisco for CIES, right? That happened this year. Some folks went from Toronto for AERA to the Comparative International Education Conference in San Francisco. There was enough time in there for people to do that, depending upon where they lived and what they had going on. But other people didn't have time if they had to go perhaps, you know, south and then take care of family stuff or do, you know, whatever. You really need to think through turnaround times and what if your flights are canceled, or what if there's weather, or what, you know, we had that snowpocalypse that came out of nowhere last week. And like all of these things that come up, you need to think about these things because it happens. Or if you're at a January conference and you're going to present at 3 o'clock and you think you're going to fly out at 10 a.m. and make it, is that really reasonable? Can that happen? Because you want to save money and you don't want to get a hotel. But all of these things matter. And then collaborating. This is something that Dr. Wright and I talked quite a bit about. Collaborating is wonderful, and it can be awful at the same time, right? So if you're going to be a single author on a paper and you're going to present your own work, or you're going to write something with somebody, that's one thing. But if you're putting together a panel, you need to think through, like, who's going to show up, right? Who's going to help you write that proposal? Who can you count on to make it to the conference that day? Or why are you collaborating? Very, very good question. Why are you collaborating? Are you collaborating? Are you trying to put together some sort of talking group with senior faculty because you want access to those faculty? Or do you think that those are the faculty who really have the expertise for the issue? Again, the one that I worked with last year, they knew exactly why they were doing it. They knew exactly who they wanted, and they had it locked in tight. And it was a wonderful session. I've also seen it where they just have like this idea of certain faculty have a certain status and they just want to know them and they want to be able to say that they had a session with them, and that's the wrong reason to do it. Because it doesn't typically turn out the way that they want it to turn out when it's not well planned. So being really strategic, because once you've interacted with people, you don't really get a second chance to interact with them again in a way that is the same. So making sure that you're planning it out, that you're being thoughtful about it, that you have a reason and a purpose, not just doing it because you happened to run into them in an elevator and it sounded like a good idea and you got the courage up to pitch it. Because when things are well organized, it's better for everybody. And you're on the job market years before you're on the job market, and you're on the job market long after you have your first job. And people remember these things. So I always remember conversations with people and the way they treat people and the way they interact in sessions or the way they ask questions, more so than their work, because I think it says so much about them when they're very kind to young scholars, or when they treat really established scholars with respect, knowing that they have accomplished so much in their lives. So it's just things to think about with collaboration, is really knowing why you're doing it and making sure that you're doing it with an intentional plan and that it's very well organized, because you don't want to do it because it's convenient. Did I cover everything that we talked about with that one, James?
Did, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, moving on. You want to go ahead and take this one?
Sure. So crafting proposals. All right, so align with, we talked about this quite a bit. So align with CFP theme and address required components. So I'll just read all three of them and then I'll try to tie it up. So number 2, bridge potential reviewers is modes of thinking. 3, follow submission directions exactly as stated on CFP. So I talked a lot about 1, aligning the call for proposal and address required components. So, so for example, if you look at the UCEA call for 2019, I won't belabor that point, but it's, you know, like I said, like if you're, for example, the theme is about subalternized forms of leadership. So, and then they identify individuals as subaltern as have been prevented from accessing social, political, or economic power within a particular society, group, or organization. And then specifically in K-12 school settings, those who can be identified as subaltern according to the CFP are teachers, instructional assistants, parent volunteers, liaisons, cafeteria workers, custodial staff. So I think that, you know, with this really broad definition and this theme, you're doing anything related to K-12, there's a niche for you. There's a way to connect to the components that are listed in this call for proposal. And the second point, bridging potential reviewers' modes of thinking. And so what I see, or what I think of when I see that, is in reading this particular call, I understand, I have an idea of what the reviewers might be looking for, because they will be aligned with what's in the call. And so, you know, again, it's just about finding your niche, or finding or taking apart an aspect of your research and then connecting it to what's in the call. And so so I think that is the best example of how, you know, you could tap into what the reviewers might be looking for. And then the third point is basically just following directions. I think that I know, well, I can speak for myself. I know, and like I said, I maybe 5 years in my doctoral program, and well, 4.5, and I'll say this honestly now. I think that, you know, I may have been really sloppy on some of my initial submissions, not intentionally, but just, you know, just rushing and thinking, you know, I'm just trying to get it in, maybe just up against a deadline. Those never got in. They never get in. They won't get it. They won't get in. So it's and I think Dr. Mackey alluded to this, that this will come across to reviewers. Reviewers will know when you're being sloppy. And I've had to review proposals as well. And you can see, you know, and it might not be that the work isn't there, but, you know, there are things that just kind of stand out to you that will be indicative of this person wasn't, maybe were crunched for time, maybe they didn't express their ideas well. You know, there's something. So, you know, the submission directions, I think all of that is related to, like, you know, just following directions. Just, you know, that's how I would
Right.
following directions to add. Try not to be, don't be sloppy. Try to be, you know, try to understand that you're going up against senior scholars, not that it's a competition or anything, but there are other folks who have a lot more experience and a lot more expertise than you and can write this stuff in your sleep. And here you are trying to find your way, and that you're going up against them to try and get a slot. So I think if you think of it that way, I think you'll be more mindful and how you spend your time.
Right. Right. Yeah. So when it says following directions, right, go ahead and go to the next slide. What do we mean? Right. So you usually have your choice of session types, like particularly with not just the type of session, but what you'll accept. Like at AERA, you can choose, which we'll come back to that. But if you say that you are going to be submitting a paper, right, make sure that you actually are submitting a paper, or if it's a panel or a symposia, because if you code it wrong, and all academic tends to be the, you know, what's used for UCEA and AERA, if you code it wrong, then it kind of messes it all up. But you need to go into, we'll use all academic as the submission site example. You're going to have a title that is X amount of words, right? And you're going to have an abstract, I think it's like 50 words or less. And that's one page. And then you're going to have to go in and do some other stuff, right? So you're going to have to know what type of session you're doing when you go into it. But if you look on the call for proposals, it'll tell you if you're doing a paper, right, you're going to need to have like some sort of introduction, a literature review, a conceptual or theoretical framework, right? You're going to have methodology and some type of finding or results and implications for future research. So when it tells you that these are the things that you need to have if you're doing a paper, those should probably be your headings, right? And so you want to make it explicit to the reviewers that not only do you know you have to have them, but here they are. Let me just walk you through them in case you can't see them for yourself. And I can't even tell you how important this is. And so making sure that your proposal matches exactly what the call says it wants in that session type. Okay? And then bring the theme up in your introduction or in your title or both, and cite a couple of the references that are cited in the call for proposals if they have something that's longer, more extended. Like UCEA uses some references, right? The CSLEE does not, AERA will, right? Depending upon that site, so they show like, I know what you're talking about. I put some thought into this and I get it. Because one of the reviewer questions in all academic is, does this proposal align with the conference theme? Right, so either it does or it doesn't. Another question is there a conceptual or theoretical framework present, right? And it's a 1 to 5. So if you just didn't get to it, or you ran out of room and you don't know how to articulate it, so you thought I'll just kind of skip this one, that's a specific question that reviewers need to ask. So if you're wondering why you're not getting in and you just don't feel comfortable with theoretical frameworks, that might be why, right? And it doesn't have to be in depth because you only get a few pages, but you need to think about those things. Formatting is really important. Use APA formatting, do it right, figure it out if you don't know how to do it, get help. I've seen things come through with track changes still there, and like really weird things, and it can be single spaced obviously, but make sure you're doing it right. And you don't have to use all of your references, because that makes it messy, right? And it's too big and you need more content. So go single spaced and cut back on references, but make sure you have enough. So when you're condensing down, it still makes sense. Make sure your literature demonstrates that you know the literature base, right? Make sure you have some sort of theoretical or conceptual framing so people know that you know where you're coming from, like how are you seeing it? And make sure that you have methodology that makes sense. Don't just say that this is an autoethnography or this is a phenomenology. Like, you have to have more than that, right? Say this is a regression analysis. Like, you have to have a little bit more than that. And start in your introduction, this qualitative whatever, this quantitative whatever. So you're being very explicit with what type of study it is, so then we know if we're looking for findings or results, and we know what's going on there. So the more explicit you are with that, and you figure out how to be very accurate and concise with your language, it is going to be helpful for you. And if you're doing a panel or a symposia, like, you're going to have little blurbs of papers, and that makes it a little bit more difficult, but you need to make sure that there's a reason why they're all there, and have an introduction, and here are the 5 papers that are going to be in there, and why, right? And with methodology, you know, you don't have to be so explicit like you would in a whole paper, but you have to speak enough to the different components that are required as per the call for proposals that the reviewers know you get it. And then again, I would say go back and talk to folks who do the work, right? So like, there's, I don't know how many times I'll get something that, because I review for a lot of stuff, and I get the same like 7 proposals for every conference, and every time the people think, like, they all think it's the first time they've ever come up with it, and it's different people every conference, and it's the same for 12 years, same, right? And it's the same idea, and and it's not novel, and it's not interesting, and it's the same people cited in it, and so pay attention to what's going on in conferences and what's being presented before you present it as this like brand new, super exciting thing that's never been done. Like a panel on, I'm making this one up now, this isn't something I've seen over and over again, but like right now, if you did a panel on like Indigenous women in leadership, that is something that some women have done really, really well the last couple of years. So if I were to propose that for AERA next year, it wouldn't be new and it wouldn't be novel, and it would be work that other people have already done well and not something that I've come up with on my own. But if I proposed it without looking at what has been done in the past, then I wouldn't know that. So think through before you're coming up with this really super cool panel of experts that it hasn't been done before. Look at past conferences or talk to people who do the similar work. That's a really big deal. And then references. Make sure that you're hitting foundational people and contemporary people. You can skip people in the middle if you need to for space, but this is also important because some reviewers want to make sure you know who wrote the first piece on it, and some reviewers want to make sure that you have really relevant 2018 references that you know that how it's evolved over time. And some people don't care as long as you have references. Either way, you want to make sure, again, meet the reviewers where they're at, because they'll mark you down for it sometimes. Okay, go ahead and go to the next one. We're going to run out of time, and I don't want to do this. And this is a pretty quick one. With AERA, like if you're a graduate student and you're saying you'll only take a paper session, you're killing yourself. If you don't want a poster session and you don't want a round table and you're saying no, you're getting rejected, and it's all on you, because very few people get paper sessions. And the way it works is the number of submissions a SIG or division gets is then you get allotted a certain amount of spaces. So like when I was a program chair for Leadership for Social Justice SIG, we ended up getting 4 sessions. So we had 2 paper sessions and 2 roundtable sessions. So I could accept 10 papers, and I could accept like 20 papers for a roundtable session. And I had a lot of really, really high rated submissions that I had to say no to because they didn't want roundtable. But roundtables are actually some of the better sessions I've ever been to. Quite frankly, you get a lot of really good discussion. So make sure you're not cutting yourself off at the knees and not getting accepted at all because you don't want to accept anything less than a paper session. It's all a numeric score, and then they're ranked numerically, and that's how it goes. So I think that that's really important, and I'm just going to hit on the etiquette really quick here because along with that, having been a program chair, having been on the conference planning committee for UCEA, I'm the conference director for CSLEE, I get emails from graduate students demanding to know why they weren't accepted, demanding that I put them on conference programs, demanding a lot, and telling me that, you know, they're trying to get a job, and I should understand that. And I get that, especially, you know, when I was the AERA program chair. But the fact of the matter is, I've had to take proposals that were like Michelle Young and say no, right? And Michelle Young has never once ever said a word to me about having a proposal not get accepted. So I think that we can learn a lot from senior scholars who are gracious and humble as younger scholars and graduate students, and understand that if we're not following the instructions on the CFP, if we're not being mindful of the fact that at AERA, sometimes you need to take the poster session or the round table, right? You have to earn these things, right? And to do that, you have to plan ahead, follow the instructions, think about formatting, think about where your work fits, and understand that there's a lot of competition. So CSLAE, you're not going to have as much, right? Graduate Student Summit, highly encourage you to apply for that. And there's a lot more competition there, right, than there used to be, because it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But you get to work with scholars one-on-one in small groups, get direct feedback, right, with that. And then the students who participate in Graduate Student Summit already have a leg up on understanding the research agendas. So then when you're ready for AERA to put in for that, you already have a way to do that. So there are all of these ways to think about doing the work and doing well, and thinking about your career plan. But the etiquette was something that we really thought was important, because people remember that. Go to the next slide. I'm only going to say one thing there on that one, so we have time for some questions and go over a little bit here. But make sure you've got it blinded. Make sure, did it need an abstract? Did you meet your word limit? You know, on the UCEA proposals for as long as, from time immemorial, 3 pages and a references page. If you send 12 pages, reviewers like me will not even read it. I don't care. If you send 12 pages, nobody else got 12 pages, it's going in the no pile. I don't even read it. All right, so follow instructions. If you can't follow those instructions, and other people did, the answer is no. Make sure that you have an account in All Academic, because if you're going in at 11:58 and you have to build your account, you're not making it. It's not going to get in. And then proofread, and make sure you get your email confirming it, because I've also gotten a lot of hate mail where people say that they turned it in and it was in, and they know that they didn't get a confirmation email. But you want to make sure that you have that. So with that, we have time for questions. I mean, we don't really have time. We have 2 minutes, but I'm sure we can stay a little bit longer on that. There's just a lot of information that goes along with conference proposals. So we're happy to answer any questions.
You guys did a great job of answering some questions that I did get through the chat and question function. I would throw out there a couple that I think might be of interest to our grad students. Where can they see an example of a proposal? And also, how many conference presentations should a graduate student do before graduating?
So I would say, so in terms of an example of a proposal, I think, Danny, we should make note of that, and let's get resources up for that. And I would say if you're a Jackson Scholar, you have to do the second year. But I would say I would put in for UCEA and AERA every year and hope for the best. Put your best foot forward. I mean, because it puts you in front of people, but you also want to connect that to publication. So I will never forget when Alex Bowers won the Culbertson Award for the Outstanding Junior Faculty in Educational Administration. It's a UCEA award. When they were presenting it, he has, for 1-to-1 ratio, publication for conference presentation. So every time, and he presents a lot. So every conference presentation he's had, he has a publication to go with it. Now that's not normal, don't get me wrong. But, you know, I mean, that's something that we should strive for, is if you don't just want to present all of the time and not publish, right? So be very, very mindful that you're supposed to be presenting your research. Your work is very, very important. And so as you're developing your work, it's a way to get feedback and refine your ideas and then get it out for publication. Or, if you've got something that just went out, present those ideas there. So there's not a number, there's not a limit, but don't trade conference presentations for publication.
Right.
I do have one more. Do we have time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, if you're working on an autoethnography, how would you present a chapter from the dissertation on a conference if you have your methodology and theoretical framework embedded in the text?
So I don't think it's a matter of embedded or not embedded, right? So, so I did an autoethnography in 2012 that ended up being one of my favorite things I've ever done, and it was kind of an experimental chapter that I poo-pooed off and didn't want to do, and I love it, still love it. And I think it's framing it as this autoethnography examines or explores, or however you want to frame it. And then when you go into your methods, like there's a methodology for autoethnography, and you just say, kind of what you did. Like, I obviously don't know the method for what you did. Like for me, I went back into journals that I had written over a period of time for a specific purpose, and I had just did some audio recordings of things that I had coded. So there's a way to do it where you just have to make sure you speak to the methods. You don't have to necessarily go into how it was exact.
Right, and if I could add to that, so I did quite a bit of work with life history methodology, and I think there are a lot of similarities with autoethnography in that, there's a lot of information that's embedded, or a lot of the findings and the analysis are embedded throughout the paper. So I think in terms of how you pull it out or separate it from, or to put it within a methodology section or thoughts on methods. So, I think the idea or the concept around thoughts on methods is that, like Dr. Mackey said, is just explaining what you did, right? So so this is an autoethnography. These are the constructs of what an autoethnography is, or how, what folks said about autoethnography, and this is what I did in that regard. And I think that's sort of the solution to that.
And also, when it comes to the findings, when I see proposals that say this is still a work in progress, that satisfies me. I'm okay with that when I read it, because you're acknowledging that, yes, I know this is required and I'm not there yet, but there's a deadline in between me and ending this. So I'm doing what you're saying. I'm following the instructions, but I need to get this in right now because it's May 7th.
All right. That actually answered the very last question that we got, like how specific to be with your results. Thank you guys for that. That was a wonderful webinar. I know that our graduate students enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm going to go ahead, and if it's okay with you, I'll conclude the webinar by letting thank you, letting everyone know that we do have more planned for you next month. Actually, our very own executive director, Monica Bern Jimenez, will join us. She will introduce herself to our graduate student community and also give you a lot of good strategies for making the most of your summer break, in quotation marks. And then June 21st, we do have another exciting webinar, Doing Good Research Well, Socially Just Approaches for Collaborating with Marginalized Communities as an Outsider. We have two co-hosts for that webinar. Dr. Smearman Levitan and Dr. Johnson will be joining us. We know that some of you have things on your schedule you may not be able to attend, and for that reason, we are uploading these webinars to the UCEA webpage. And I just want to give you a little bit of information on how to find those. When you go to ucea.org, towards the middle of the page, there's a link for resources. You click on that. And then on the very next page, left-hand side, all the way at the bottom, it'll say webinars. You click on webinars, it'll take you to our February webinar, our March webinar, and then this one should be up there probably within 24 hours. Okay, so thanks again. I hope everyone has a great end to the week. Have a nice weekend, and hopefully we will see you next month.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wright. Thanks, Danny.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you, Dr.
Danny.
Wright.
You're welcome.